Welcome to Global View. Today we have the pleasure to welcome to the show Jonathan Gilliam, a seasoned expert in national security, law enforcement, and leadership, with a career spanning from U.S. Navy SEAL officer, FBI special agent, Federal Air Marshal, and DHS security specialist. Jonathan, you have firsthand experience in counterterrorism, threat mitigation, and crisis management. Beyond your operational expertise, you're also a best-selling author, speaker, and consultant, dedicating into educating individuals and organizing organization on security awareness and leadership. Your book, which had the pleasure to witness at the presentation hub, Ship No More: The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, has been widely recognized for its practical approach to personal safety and situational awareness. Welcome to Global View. Thanks for being with us today.
Man, it is great to be with you all, and what an introduction. But I guess that means nothing when you're on X because people don't care about your background, so they'll just argue with me like on anything that I may have experience in. So it's interesting to hear somebody read my resume back to me, but that's been a long career of learning and stuff that you all and I see on a daily basis is happening in this government and around this world is unbelievable when you look at it from a threat assessment point of view. We're seeing things happen that we've never seen before in the history of this country, so it's amazing.
And Jonathan, I think it's very important to remind people exactly your career and your expertise so that they can learn even better from your insights. And, I have a question for you because,
Mhm.
the last years, America has seen a very dark age of regarding the trust in its
Mhm.
institution, in particular the FBI. I think this Russia pre-planned investigation, which was nothing more, nothing less than a political tool to target Trump and people in his circle, has completely broken the trust of a citizen in the efficiency of the federal agents and also their motivations, which
Mhm.
is not to protect people, but to be a political tool in the hand of a political wing, in this case, Biden's and the Democrats. As a former FBI agent, special agent, how what's your overlook on this issue? I mean, do you think there is a room for retrieve trust in the institution that working back as they should under, for example, Kash Patel as
Right.
FBI director, or what's your take on it?
Well, I think it's going to take more than Cash Patel to write that reputation. I think first and foremost, there needs to be criminal charges. I mean, for all the things that George, you, and everybody else went through, this is all connected to a criminal enterprise. I think that there's more than enough probable cause to start an investigation, to start looking at all these different players as participants of a criminal enterprise, and then charge these people. And I think if penalties are laid down, I love what Doge is doing. I love everything that Trump is doing and the speed at which he's doing it. But recognizing what's going on is not going to be enough to prove to the American people that there's trust. You can trust the government again. So there has to be penalties, and people have to be charged and convicted of the things that they've done. I mean, the Russian hoax, start with that. And that by no means is that the beginning, but start with that. They manufactured evidence. First off, if I was in any case and I manufactured evidence and then took it before a court and was caught, I would go to jail myself, and the person being charged would have gotten complete. They would have dropped the whole case, right? But in this case, they manufactured evidence. They took it to the FISA judge, but before anything goes to the FISA judge, it has to be scrubbed by a separate unit. That's what they do. They scrub the information that has anything to do with American citizen to make sure that it is all provable, and then they take it to the judge, and then they get a FISA warrant. They didn't do any of that. It went through, and somehow, some way, nothing was scrubbed, nothing got caught, and then was passed. All of that is so criminal in nature It's like something that you would see out of a movie with a bunch of bad cops and a bad judge, for instance. And in this case, that was just a spoonful of the Olympic-sized swimming pool of corruption that we're now seeing. And I think that's what it's going to take. Now, Trump, the guy thinks 10 miles ahead of what I do, and he may already have a plan set out on how he's going to bring that trust back. I think Kash Patel is part of that. I think whoever's going to be, whoever's in charge, I can't remember his name, of the CIA and all these different agencies are going to be a part of building that trust back. But I think we need to be shown three things: that executives can be fired, that people that organized and carried out these schemes can be charged and convicted, and that recruitment is going to change. Recruitment and promotions. No more DEI. If you're not qualified to be in the job, then you're not in the job. And if you're in the job and you're not doing a good job and you don't get good peer evals, we don't do peer evals in most federal government. They need peer evals. They need recordable things that you've achieved, not just boxes that you check. So they're not just promoting their buddies. And once they do that, I think the American people, and if they keep the transparency where they're showing exactly what they're doing, I think they can get that trust back. But by and large, I think that a lot of these agencies could just go away, or portions of them could go away, and we won't have to worry about the trust anymore. Just get rid of them because we don't need a lot of it. So I think to answer your question, it can be gained back. The trust can be gained back, but there's a process that we're going to have to go through. And I would not recommend people giving their trust and saying, well, we know Trump's involved now. We're going to trust the government. Again, I agree with almost everything that Donald Trump says, but we should not trust the government ever, but especially until it is clean. Because right now, even though Trump's in charge, they're still doing things that are the it's not necessarily the political appointees now. It's the people that are under them, the senior executive service, the SAS or SESers. They are dangerous people, and the people they bring up with them are like puppets. So that stuff still exists. And as we can see, they're doing things like sending money out when they're told not to send any money out anymore.
Yeah.
So it still exists.
Mm. Jonathan, a very general question before I have very specific questions, but a general one. Over the last 2 to 3 years, there have been the drums of war have been growing louder and louder in the halls of Congress, especially amongst Republican members of Congress, stalwart allies of President Trump, even conservative influencers, to abolish or defund the FBI. So the question I have is, does the FBI still have a role to play in American security? And should it remain intact the way it has been? Or should, at the very least, it be defunded and at the worst be abolished? What are your general thoughts on that statement or that question?
Sure. I think so. First of all, what is happening to USAID, for instance, needs to be done with the FBI and the DOJ.
Mhm.
The banana needs to be peeled, and everything needs, or the onion needs to be peeled, and we need to look at everything that's underneath there. And so the audit is going to would tell us a lot. But then we need to start looking at who was hired when, and how they've progressed, what the mission statement of that agency is, and where units that do certain things, how they've progressed and how they've been utilized. So basically an audit of not just the financials, but the mission overall. And I think what you'll find is that the FBI does play a huge role in our national security, both from a criminal and counterterrorism and counterespionage point of view. But they also do things like the National Academy, which the FBI sponsors, where police officers come from all over the country and they participate in the National Academy. And it's like a gentleman's police academy, but it brings officers from all over the country so they get to know each other, they get to learn certain procedures together. And then if this agency over here has a murder investigation and it links to this. They can say, hey, I went to National Academy with this guy over here, and they just call them. And so the flow of investigations happens so much easier. And it's a force multiplier for the FBI, and the FBI acts as a force multiplier for local law enforcement. So those things are very critical that we do. The assets that we have that when we assist in investigations, the FBI doesn't always lead investigations. A lot of times we assist in those. Very important. And if they were to go away, that would be lost to the states and the local authorities. I do believe that agencies like the ATF should be dissolved, and that should be absorbed into the FBI. There's things like with ICE, for instance, they do drugs, they do all kinds of different investigations that the FBI used to do. The DEA does counterterrorism investigations. Why is the DEA doing that? The DEA could go away and could be absorbed into the FBI. So, not to make the FBI bigger and more powerful, but to take away from these other external agencies that exist for basically the promotion of the SES or the senior executive service people. And it exists where the liberals can utilize the ATF to make laws when they're not really laws. Like they're saying it's a law and it's not a law. It wasn't done by Congress. The ATF puts out something about a gun and calls it a law, and it's not. So I think if we get rid of those agencies and move the drug cases back to the FBI, the gun cases, the crime cases back to the FBI, and then have a system of checks and balances where we police the FBI, because the FBI has their own police or system of policing themselves called OPR, and there's an inspector general for the Department of Justice. But the problem is, as we've seen, those can be politicized. So there has to be a system in how these agencies are policed. So we get rid of all the senior executive people. We change the promotions, change the recruiting, get rid of these superfluous agencies that exist for reasons of promotion or oppression, basically, and then really limit what the Bureau does and create some kind of consistent internal audit that shows if there's any type of misuse of power. So I think if we started concentrating on that, same thing with the IRS, like these agents that they put on the border now that they're saying they're going to take these 87,000 agents that we're hiring and put them on the border. Well, the problem is those people, by and large, are not even qualified to be investigators, right? They were barely trained as law enforcement. So if they don't get rid of those people, they can then come into the system and filter into these other agencies. So there needs to be a systematic purge of all that nonsense and these other superfluous agencies. Make the FBI a simple entity that is audited and let them continue in their counterterrorism, criminal, and counter espionage type of missions. That's what I feel.
I completely agree with you. So what I got from what you just said is that there certainly is a function for the FBI, and it's in the FBI's own interest and U.S. national security to make it more of a lean, mean fighting machine with all the superfluous and wasted budgets and the politicization. So, following up on that,
Let me, George, let me say
yeah,
one other thing about this. It popped in my head as you were saying that.
sure.
In 2008, I believe it was, we changed our dialogue, and our dialogue is our investigative Bible. It's all the policies in the FBI, and they go into this. And it became very apparent that we were moving from a law enforcement agency into an intelligence gathering agency, and it made no sense to us. And I was on a task force, so I'm sitting there with NYPD and New York State Police, um, and we're all like, this is very strange at this point, because I was on the Asian Organized Crime Squad at that point. And I remember our assistant director in charge. So we have, the top guy is a director. He has a deputy directors, and it goes on down. And an assistant director is somebody who's in charge of one of the larger field offices. So New York is the biggest, and it has an assistant director. And he was telling us, like, apologizing because of Hoover's reputation. And I found that to be very strange because it was a different world then. And Hoover made the FBI, and people can say whatever they want about the guy,
Hmm.
but he built the FBI. And here's the thing that the assistant director says, we have to look past the history of our director where he targeted, um, you know, uh, black separatist groups, um, gay extremists, um, Hollywood liberals, and he goes through all these. And I looked at the detective next to me. The detective looked at me and said, "Isn't that all the groups that are ruining our country?" Like Hoover saw this back then. He was targeting those people. Now he did it in a way that now we say is in some ways illegal by keeping records on people and doing these things. But he had the foresight to see that these groups were the ones that were going to cause the problems. Now, I think where we got to in the FBI is the very groups that he talked about are some of the groups that got their claws into the Bureau and into the DOJ and into Congress and the presidency at one point, and they are the ones who manipulate things. Because look at who USA spend their money on, trans issues, gay activists. We have different separatist groups that the money's been spread around. So I think looking back on that, it just popped in my brain. I can see where the systematic apology happened at the same time this changed it in the government where they were funding these exact people that they were criticizing Hoover for going after. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, and actually, it's the entire point of this new administration, that the whole administration Biden
Mhm.
setting priorities on issues that are actually concerning a really small percentage of the population, do not affect the major issues America is facing today, including homelessness, immigration threats, crisis of
Right.
financial crisis of any kind. And I think that's the reason why Donald Trump, besides his objective leadership qualities, won so big. But
Yeah.
going back to the trust in the institution and your expertise in counterterrorism and cyber attacks as well, I
Mhm.
have almost a feeling that the biggest threat we faced over the past years comes from within. So, how do we are we prepared? And is there any department in the FBI agency or any other department in the government that can actually back off those threats? And how we respond to that? Because the biggest enemy from within, I believe, has been the enemy of the United States.
You nailed it right there. I mean, that's why we swear an oath when we get an official job. We swear an oath to support the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
The mess.
Because while we were concentrating, the public was thinking that the government was concentrating on stopping cyber terrorists or cartels bringing fentanyl over, all these the ISIS and all these things. Or if you listen to the Biden administration, white supremacists. While all that was going on, it was actually people within our own government and globalists working together to systematically destroy this nation from within. And so I think, first of all, Doge and the way it's being used and the work that they're doing, I don't think there's, I don't think anything has ever existed like that before. And that is exactly what we need. But we can use that whole structure of Doge to look at different things. So they're auditing finances. We can audit tactics. We can look at all the
Mm,
tactics of the DoD, for instance. We've never won a war since World War II. Why is that? Because after World War II, we went from the Department of War to the Department of Defense, which is a progressive thing to do. We turned the Eagles face on our symbol, on the U.S. symbol or seal. He used to look at the arrows and he would hold the olive branch in reserve. So we're projecting force, but we still have diplomacy if you want to go that way. But then after they changed the Department of War to Department of Defense, they moved the Eagles face and now it faces the olive branches and
Mm.
holds force in
mm,
reserve.
mm,
And so everything weakened this nation. And if we audit our tactics, we're going to see that we don't fight wars to eliminate an enemy. We fight wars for some weird strategic formula that just does not work. where we create a vacuum and it gets filled by worse people. And the wars go on for 20 years. And the people who make money out of that is the military industrial complex and politicians. So I think this, what Trump and Elon Musk have designed with Doge is there needs to be that agency needs to be have different units that target these agencies in different ways, because I think what they'll find is, and I believe there should be a czar that overwatch, just like
Mm.
Tom Homan is a border czar.
Yeah,
There needs to be a an audit czar where
should be.
they look at all these agencies and say these are the commonalities in all of them. So there's no way you could look at every agency unless it was done systematically that every top of every agency just below a director is a leftist, right?
Absolutely.
So if they
Mm.
audit these people and they say, wow, they have the same ideology, all these people, we know that there's a system in place to get them those people promoted. And so then they go after that. And I think that is really the cycle that needs to happen. I think Trump is on to something here. I'm sure he realizes it, but whether he realizes the where this could be used, I don't know if he does. But I think that this is the thing that has to happen.
Absolutely. I think Doge is restating this concept of accountability. And it's important that people understand that every time you manage something that doesn't belong to you, in this case, the American taxpayer money, you need
Mhm.
to be held accountable for. You need transparency about how you're managing it. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people in the service of America. And that's something that people should really stick in their brain.
Right, right. And it's unbelievable to the amount of what you just said. Just that alone is
Common
enough
sense.
to build a country. You could take the money that's been wasted in the way that, because they disregard that, and it's enough money that we could have supported this entire nation and went and built a whole nother country. It's crazy when you think about that.
Mhm. John, I want to shift gears for a second. A lot of you've described a lot of threats that the United States faces, both externally and domestically. You've also talked about inefficiencies and budgets of the FBI and the national security apparatus, including the FBI. So, with the myriad threats that the United States faces, both domestic and externally, real threats from cyber criminals, foreign terrorist organizations, Mexican and or drug cartels that are shipping fentanyl, spies in America. You have it. You've named it, and you know what I'm talking about. So,
Mhm.
given these threats, why or why I should say, when did the FBI's mission go from facing those threats to then going after MAGA grandmas, white Christian males, and MAGA supporters in general that make up 75 to 80 million people in the United States?
Mhm.
When did this shift happen? And do you think that President Trump could stop this insidious shift in the FBI's priorities in terms of saving or safeguarding the American people?
So when it started, I know under Mueller, like I said, when the dialogue changed, I think you can go back really to 9/11 of 2001.
Mhm.
I think that when that occurred, the way that the flow in which the FBI functioned changed, because
Mhm.
a lot of people who were not really qualified to be executives were quickly pushed up, and they use it as as an excuse to promote this person or that person. And it was genuinely or generally not criminal investigators. So people from the criminal side of the house were not typically the ones who were promoted. It was a lot of counterintelligence people, a lot of counterintelligence people, and a lot of people who were from CT. And at that point, CT was not big, right? The majority of really talented agents were criminal investigators. And so when 9/11 happened, the CT people were pushed up. And then you saw people from the criminal side who were not really respected. They jumped over because that's the way the government works. You can take the biggest incompetent buffoon, and somehow they're friends with other buffoons that are typically higher, and those people will never reach down and say, you know, let me get George Papadopoulos. He's really good at this, and let's bring him. They won't do that. They'll reach out and grab David Hogg, who's a buffoon, and they'll say, let's bring him up here, and because I know David, So
Hmm.
there's a lot of incompetent nepotism that goes
Yeah.
on inside when quick promotions like that happen.
Mm.
I think that's when it went really fast from that point. Um, and I think that the second part of your question was how do we? What was the second part of that question? Was
How do we force the FBI to reprioritize the mission to safeguarding the American
right,
public instead of
right,
focusing on 80-year-old MAGA grandmas and
right,
targeting people that are peacefully protesting outside of abortion clinics?
yeah,
Because the real threats emanate from within
right,
with these type of leaderships and the type of ideologies that they subscribe to. I think that's what you're getting at. And then
yeah.
we have the external issues with the open border that the Biden administration has kept. And then, of course, with the various threats, the illegal aliens, and God knows who's in this country at this point, and why President Trump has been so adamant to get Tom home and, to get some of these people out of here and to seal the border. So that was the second part is how do we force the FBI to reprioritize the mission? Do we just
Right.
fire these ideologues at the top? Do we have to retrain the rank and file, as they like to call them? What's the secret sauce to getting this FBI back on track?
Well, first of all, you have to have a administration which includes not only the president but whoever, if Cash Patel gets in there, the
Mm-hmm.
director of the FBI, Pam Bondi, the AG, has to be on board with this. And um, they have to look at the reality. The other part of that first answer is where it started was with DEI called affirmative action under President Clinton, right? So
Mm.
when I graduated college in 1995, a white male with a double major in political science and psychology, I couldn't get a job as a cop. As crazy as that sounds, I just could not get a job as a cop. And until I kept trying, and finally at a small town or a small department, I got a job for, and then I went in the Navy. But the point of that is when DEI really took off, right? So
Mm.
even before 9/11, for when the FBI started to really change rapidly in its leadership, affirmative action was the beginning of DEI. So what happens is that they lowered, and this is going to be key to the answer of how they change this. The
Mm-hmm.
FBI lowered, and all these other agencies lowered their standards, right? Because they would then take somebody based on the color or gender, and so that became more important. They would get rid of something like, okay, females don't have to do pull-ups. So there's no required amount of pull-ups. So now you've lowered the standards. So two people come in when you do that. Careerists who are largely incompetent and people who meet that box that needs to be checked who are also typically less than. Because it doesn't matter if you're a female, a male, black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. If you are the best, you don't want a box that's you can check to get in. You want to be looked at as the best. And so the people that ride that wave in are typically not the best. So
Mm.
as the years progressed, those standards went down even further, which encouraged more of those people to come in. So now we have careerists who come in and climb a ladder to get into positions of power, and DEI people who are pulled in and pushed up into positions of power. And so then they get in positions where they're writing policy. And now
Mm-hmm.
the policy standards go down. So the biggest overall change that President Trump could make is to change the standards. Your athletic standards must be very high. Drug standards, no drugs whatsoever. Criminal record, nothing. Right? See, so we have to go back to those standards,
Yeah.
and you will weed a great vast majority. No boxes to check. It doesn't matter if you're not the best, you're not coming in. And if they get back to those standards over a period of time, it will weed out a lot of those people. In the meantime, fire the executives. I hate to say it, don't care if they're good or bad. If there's nothing they can prove they did wrong, then give them full retirement and get them out of there. Um, make it so that if you find an agent doing anything remotely criminal, such as writing a letter, a memo about the Catholic Church saying
Hmm.
how they have to target them, um, bring them up on the max criminal charges you can, hammer them, and make an example out of them. And again, those people will leave. And then the other ones, if you just put President Trump's picture up on a wall, the Trump derangement syndrome will push a vast majority of those people out. They will just leave because they're demonic, I believe, a lot of these people. So I think
I-
there's a system there, and it starts with standards. Make the
yes.
standards higher, and the people who can't make those standards will leave.
I agree 100%. We have seen recently an oddly suspicious number of aircraft crashes, plane
Mhm.
crashes. Based on on your expertise, do you think it's more about competence, incompetence, or there is some sort of cyber attack going on
Hmm.
here?
Well, there's a couple things. One, there's statistics that show if um, two fatal plane crashes happen in within a week, then you're going to have a cluster of crashes. And that's just statistics. It's a very
Statistic.
strange
Okay.
Hmm.
statistic. I brought this up on Fox one night, and people got online and were saying that I was a turncoat for the government trying to tell people that we're going to be more crashes. And so I said
Okay.
something to do with it. But there's statistics out there you can research. So I think a lot of these clusters are historical. They happen. You may often see the same thing when you have two family members or two friends that die very close together. You'll notice that several people will pass away in a small amount of time. It's just some weird. I'm not a mathematician, so I can't explain it, but there's a statistic that shows how this occurs. So that's a factor. But I think the airline industry has been decimated by DEI, just the same way the government has. I know for a fact, I have a friend who's with a major airline. One of their senior pilots was passed over for a promotion because they said he wasn't black. He said, "Well, I'm American Indian and Mexican." And they said, "Yeah, well, you're not black." So they passed over him because he wasn't the right minority.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
so the people who get promoted again are getting promoted because of they fill a box, they check a box. And when you put pilots in command because of that, or you put air traffic controllers or maintenance people, which is the other thing that people aren't looking at. Tons of
Mm,
maintenance people have been put into position, hired or promoted because they're gay, trans, of a certain minority or a female without even remotely looking at the depth of their experience. So
mm.
you add that into the airline industry and you're going to have planes fall out of the air. On top of that, if you have an FBI or a DHS that is concentrated on if a 80-year-old woman is standing in front of and praying in front of a abortion clinic, if
Mm.
they're putting whole squads on that and not on cyber to see if they can knock planes out of the sky, then you're going to have that threat as possible. That could happen. Um, as an investigator, I don't say that's not a cause. I haven't seen any of these
Mm-hmm.
relate to that, but who's to say it is or isn't or won't be?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the
Yeah.
drone issue that came up, right? That
Oh
became
yeah, that's
hysterical and people
really.
went out of control with that, right? There's
Mm,
probably some of those drones that were nefarious in nature, but you saw New Orleans happen where a terrorist attack occurred, right?
mm.
And you don't see anything changing with barriers around this country, and you don't see anybody concentrate on drones as an attack weapon, which they're using in the Ukraine every
Yes.
day
Yes, exactly.
and in Africa. And uh, so we need that shift to happen where we think outside the box because the FBI and the federal government, they do not, they have an unwritten rule. I got yelled at, I wrote about this in the book. The senior agent yelled at me one day and he said, "You know what your problem is? 90% of what you do is outside the box. This is the FBI. We think inside the box." And
Hmm.
I told him, I said, "Benny, that was the greatest compliment anybody's ever given me," which made him even more mad. But we need a government agents that think outside the box. And we don't have that right now, unfortunately.
Jonathan, speaking about thinking outside the box, And we've talked about the threat assessments. We've talked about the border a bit and the Mexican cartels and the various cartels, not simply Mexican cartels. President Trump, during the campaign, talked about launching surgical strikes against Mexican cartels deep into Mexico.
Mhm.
You're a former Navy SEAL. Is this a feasible tactic from the president? Do you think it's wise? And if it is indeed wise, what would the outcome be of the U.S. launching strikes and potentially even using Navy SEALs
Mhm.
deep into Mexico to take these cartels out?
It has to be done differently than we've done it before, right? With other wars,
Mm-hmm.
we have to look at this as an elimination war where we're going to eliminate the enemy. And we don't need to worry about building hearts and minds. We don't need to worry about getting rid of a leader and then thinking that the whole thing is over with. Because what's transpired in Mexico and a lot of Central South America for that matter is that when the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel and some of these different groups were, when their leaders were taken out, it fragmented, and because they were very, very powerful. So it fragmented and the power base shifted. Mexico used to be a go through and they had cartels there, but by and large, their cartels were not where the power base was located. And so now what you have is you have these very powerful cartels all through Mexico that work through Central South America and the United States. And so the power base is there in Mexico. They have to treat this, now that they're considered a terrorist organization, they have to be treated with like a terrorist organization that utilizes all of our assets. So not just military,
Mm.
white collar crime is really what this is in a lot of ways. The cartels are not an ideology, they are a criminal organization. So you go after shutting down their trade routes, you go after destroying their product, you go after taking their leaders out and their warrior or their soldiers out, and then you go after Mexico, so where they make the penalties for the people who drive the trucks, or if they want to turn on the cartels and say, we're driving the trucks and here's the reality, so we can work with them. Um, those people are the most. There's the biggest amount of people involved in this are the superficial people who only push stuff forward. It's the soldiers that the war really exists with, and the cartel leaders, which could be done militarily. But the rest of it is really done through white collar, almost like Doge, where they go in, they identify all this thing, they basically audit from afar, and they start destroying their business. And if you destroy their business, there is no cartel. There's just none. And I think that is probably what's going to be most effective. But if they only do it to eliminate a leader, it's not going to work. You have to eliminate, which World War II and prior, that's what we did. You eliminate your enemy. If we don't eliminate them and their business, this will either be a forever war or it will just fizzle out and nothing successful will really occur.
A follow-up to this about because they are designated as a terrorist organization now, and obviously there are a lot of Islamic terrorist organizations from Hezbollah to the Houthis around the world. Would you utilize the same tactics against the cartels as we have done historically against Islamic terrorist organizations, or are they a bit different?
Well, so some of those tactics, yes, for sure. But the tactic that I wouldn't use is that the Bush administration, Obama administration, that they think taking out a leader is the success that you
Mm.
needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, look at Iraq, for instance. We took out Saddam Hussein for whatever reason. Saddam Hussein was actually
Mm-hmm.
was a dictator, but he was the least of our concerns. He actually, same with Gaddafi when those two were in power, um, there was still terrorism, but by and large, they kept a status quo, I guess you would say, a Middle Eastern status quo. And bad dudes, but you get rid of them, and what happens? It creates a bigger vacuum, and then we have a 20-year war. that amounts to nothing. Afghanistan's the same way. We fought that war to slap the Taliban around, and then we just left, and nothing really was solved. We cannot do that with the cartels, and but we have to look at them as more than a Islamic or an ideological group, because the cartels have an ideological group does not have a finite system that if you break it, they're just going to go away. An ideology, and unless you kill every single person that believes in that ideology, or like in the case with Hitler, where you eliminate um, enough of those people where they fold, or the same thing with Japan in World War II, their whole system of thinking changed. With a cartel, you don't have to go that far. You just have to eliminate their business, and then you have to eliminate their ability to wage war. And if you eliminate those things, you're going to cripple them, and eventually there will be no reason for them to exist, because they have no product. They have no uh, why am I forgetting this word? They have no profit, right?
Hmm.
There's no profit. And if the cartels don't have a profit, they're not looking at eternity in their heaven. They're looking at, I need as much money as I can get right now. So if you eliminate that, they're probably going to end up going away.
Jonathan, final question for me. You have people like Senator Graham or Senator Cotton or some of the more war hawks or neocons in the Republican establishment who talk about Russia and China as a preeminent threats to U.S. national security. I happen to believe that the cartels, terrorist organizations, non-state actors, and millions of undocumented people who with violent criminal pasts working and living in the shadows in the United States pose a much bigger threat. Where do you stand on Russia and China as threats to the homeland? And two, if they are indeed threats, how would you deal with countries like China and Russia today?
So these are more complex issues, but I think the way Trump handles these dictators or leaders of these nations is very interesting, because he will draw them closer. And unfortunately, this is where the left uses their propaganda. But he will draw these individuals in closer, and and figure out who they really are, figure out what their motivation is. And then a lot of the times it's just competition for business. And I think Trump is really well versed in looking at people and figuring out if they want to go to war, or if they just want to screw over the United States on the business field. So I think that having a president that sees those things is very important, because it's it is hard to tell. North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, they all three have their motivations. Iran is definitely dead set on eliminating Israel and taking over the world. I believe that that is their quest. I cannot understand why nobody does not take that regime out. We have the power. Why don't we just take the regime out of Iran? There's something else going on there, where Iran is either a puppet of a bigger group, or somebody's getting kickbacks from Iran. They're just not taking them out. I don't know what that is. But when it comes to Russia and China, I think the financial battlefield is where they want to fight,
Mm-hmm.
because as Putin is seen now, a war, especially with an enemy that can hit in his shores, is not beneficial to him whatsoever. I don't think Putin is up to fighting another war after this one, not for or Russia in general. China, I think they have a big problem with repopulating their military. They have a lot of people, they have a lot of technology, but the majority of technology I've ever seen that's China made has always got its default, and then they just don't have the male population to replenish their troops.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it would not be beneficial for their long-term survival to go to war. So I think they want to do their battle, because having worked in Asian organized crime, I can tell you that the Chinese mentality is to give a guy a hug and stab him in the back at the same time. And they will tell you whatever it takes to make you feel good about yourself while they're getting your money and giving you crap, right? So that's the way they work a lot of the times. North Korea, on the other hand, is a cult and
Hmm.
should be treated as such. But I think Trump was very close to changing North Korea into what he's talked about with the West Bank and Hamas. I mean, I think he was very close. Maybe not, but it felt like to me he could have convinced um, he could have convinced Kim Jong Un to turn North Korea into a resort. I mean, the way that they communicated was pretty interesting. So I think those issues are completely different than the cartel issue. The cartel issue is something that ultimately could be won and could be fixed, and probably quicker than most people expect. But I think that the not diplomacy, because as you've probably seen your time around government, diplomats and diplomacy in government is it's very thin, very fake, and a lot of people are making a lot of money and power from that, right? But the way Trump does diplomacy in bringing these people in closer and figuring out who they are and what makes them tick, I think his type of diplomacy is the future of effective diplomacy for the United States. And I think that's how we handle them.
Thank you. One last question on my side. You raised a very good point about teaching people to think out of the box, right? And also reassessing some of the historical events like Gaddafi and Arab Spring that resulted in Europe in an Arab winter when we look at the result of the death of Gaddafi. So when we talk about making a change for the future, what would you be the last advice to make people no sheeps no more?
Awareness. I mean, so the problem with people in general is that social media, that's why I made that joke at the very beginning about social media, about my resume, is that a resume doesn't really matter to general population. They will look right past the resume and tell you you have no idea what you're talking about, right? Um, but the other problem is it allows people who don't have experience to climb these ladders and get themselves into position. So people like Donald Trump's biggest threat to him, besides the Democrat Party and these people trying to kill him, is he has to be very careful of who he brings in close to him, because rich and successful people, as I'm sure you all have seen, have to constantly guard themselves against grifters who are trying to make themselves bigger or richer off of that successful person. And so I think powerful people like Trump need to be very careful, because the image that people can make for themselves now, it can be 180 degrees out from who they really are. So you have to
Yes.
vet people very well.
Hmm.
And then your average citizen has to vet who they listen to and what they believe, and not think that they know everything. And I
Yeah,
think Socrates said it himself the best. I know that I do not
I don't
know.
know.
And
Yes.
so that allows a person to critically think. And right now, the way the world is, it's full of people who do not critically think. The left has been bad about that. MAGA is getting worse. And the people in MAGA need to realize, if I have a different opinion about you, then it's not because I'm your enemy. It's because I thought through this thing and I came up with a different conclusion. Let's talk about it. But instead, you'll have a bunch of people bully you, jump on you, try to ruin you. And all the while, you are a significant contributor to the same thing they believe in. So if people don't want to be sheep and we want to turn this country into a well-oiled, focused, powerful citizenry again, people they have to heed this advice, and they have to be willing to critically think, to say, I don't know everything. Maybe you think something differently because you thought of something or you know something I don't know. And then when you have an enemy like the left, we cannot, the right is so bad about this. We do not get up and step out on the street and stay out there. We go to a rally where Trump shows up, we have fun, we clap, and then everybody goes home. Meanwhile, the left goes out and they protest until the roads are shut down and they stay there for weeks. And the right never does that. And that's why we were able to fall to people like Biden. And, when these people were arrested outside of these abortion clinics,
Mhm.
80-year-old woman praying out front of an abortion clinic, and she was arrested, where were the conservatives? Where when Ralph Northam, I think his name was, who was the governor of Virginia, said that we should set babies aside, decide whether, give them comfort and aid, and then decide whether we terminate them. That's murder. Where were the 60, 80,000, a million Virginians confronting him and not leaving the Capitol until they change that, right? So the right has to stand up to the left, but the right cannot demolish itself. That's
Thank you
why the
so
left
much.
stays powerful. They don't demolish themselves. So
That's a
that's how we get past the sheep mentality.
Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It was a real pleasure to talk with you.
You
And where
got it.
people can find you?
They can just go to jonathantgilliam.com, but it's if you just Google my name or you go on Twitter and you look up Jonathan Gilliam, you'll see this face, and they can find me. Instagram's the same thing, and Facebook as well. I'm out there. They just have to look for this face. I don't know if you guys have ever Googled yourself. I've never
I
looked
don't
your
like
name
to do
up,
that.
George. But when I do it,
Better off.
I can't
Yeah.
believe how many Jonathan Gilliams there are out there on social media. I never knew there was that many guys named that. So they're out there. So you look for the face and the voice, and I'm always open. And when people want to ask questions about something, I try my hardest to respond.
Well, in my case, Jonathan, if you Google me, you'll find a Greek dictator from the 70s or me. So I guess I'm in good company
There
somehow.
you go.
But Jonathan, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the insight, and I know our viewers are going to love this and they're going to follow you. And we're looking forward to seeing what you have in store next.
You got it. Hey, maybe someday I'll end up at Mar-a-Lago and you guys will be there. I've
It would
never
be
been there. Maybe someday that'll happen.
it
That
would be
would
a
be great.
pleasure to meet you there or anywhere else.
You got it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Anytime. All right.
Thank you
Thank you
so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.